Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sueños to Success. This is the podcast where we uncover inspiring stories of resilience, transformation, and personal success. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with a medical doctor whose journey is nothing short of remarkable, Dr. Mike Shenoda. Dr. Shenoda grew up facing significant challenges, including witnessing violence as a kid and losing a loved one to illness. Despite these hardships, he persevered and became a highly respected cardiologist, a heart doctor in his community. His story is one of resilience, dedication, and unwavering commitment to making a difference in the lives of his patients. He is now saving lives one heart at a time. Welcome, Dr. Shenoda. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rios. Appreciate that kind introduction.
Of course, of course. And before we dive into your story, you know, I just want to ask our listeners to reflect. There was a Gallup poll that showed that being a medical doctor is like the number one recommended profession that kids get in K to 12. And then on top of that, it's like 30% of kids at one point or another say they want to be a medical doctor. So I want my audience to think about like what does it take to become a doctor against the odds? What inner strength, what support systems, what mindset allows someone to rise above adversity and dedicate their life to healing others? And so, as my audience reflects a little bit on this, I do want to ask you, Dr. Shinoda, because I gotten to hear you talk a little bit of your kind of early days, your upbringing. Let's start at the beginning of your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? What was your childhood like, and what challenges did you face growing up in a tough environment?
Sure, absolutely. So, I grew up in an underserved area. I was born in Inglewood, California. Grew up in Bellflower, which is Compton adjacent. I am a first generation Egyptian American, born to immigrant parents who fled persecution from their country and came here to start a new life and go to college and get educated. Growing up in Bellflower was rough. I grew up in the era in which gang violence was very prevalent. It was kind of the height of the Crips and the Bloods era. I mean, I know it's still going on now, but it just seems like in the 80s it was really rampant and ramping up quickly. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, I lost one of my elementary school friends who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing the street when there's two rival gangs on each side of the street, and they started shooting at each other. And she unfortunately was shot in the head and passed away from that.
How old? How old?
I was in fifth grade when that happened.
Wow.
So I was pretty young, and I remember attending the funeral and being interviewed on TV about it and how I felt about this great person passing away of gang violence, and as a fifth grader,
So this is a friend that was from the neighborhood?
yeah, from my elementary school.
Wow.
Growing up in elementary school, it's one of my friends in elementary school. So, it was a lot to take in, and when my immigrant parents didn't know any better, hadn't lived here, hadn't grown up here, and we all just thought this was normal living in America.
Whoa.
Just normal part of the process.
What led them to arrive to this neighborhood?
Jobs. It was jobs. My father went to school in Michigan and decided it was way too cold there. He immigrated when he was 18, did college in Michigan, and it was way too cold. He said, "I'm moving out to California." And he was a social worker, so he got a job in that community as a social worker, and that's what brought our family.
So he was serving that community, and he wanted to live in the community he served.
Right.
Y'all are growing up in this environment,
Yeah.
but he's also assuming this is America. This is how things go.
Yeah. It was just normal life in
How
America.
so you're in fifth grade. Your friend passes away. Gang violence, gunshot. How did you cope with it as a little kid?
Again, I just thought this is kind of how things are. It's all I've been exposed to. For my short life at that time. I obviously felt horrible about it. But I just thought this is the way things are, and I just have to kind of accept it and just kind of move past it, you know?
Wow. Now I know you mentioned you're Egyptian American. You're growing up in sort of a area, L.A., Inglewood, Bell, where you're kind of um, you're a minority among minorities. Did,
Absolutely.
did you ever like? Did people think you were Mexican or Latino
All the
ever?
time. I
Yeah.
mean, I went to a school where you were either Hispanic or you were black, and people would always look at me and be like, well, "I don't know what you are." You can be either one. You got the
Mm,
curly hair, but you got the brown skin. So even within an underrepresented community, I felt that I was even more underrepresented because there was no one that looked like me in my neighborhood. It was just me.
wow.
And so I just kind of learned to just be myself. And I was like, well, I'm not part of this group. I'm not part of that group. I'm just me
Yeah, yeah. Y a veces te hablaban en español. Would people talk to you in Spanish, thinking you would
all
respond?
the time, all the time. Yeah,
Wow,
absolutely. And I took 4 years of Spanish, but I still don't know it well enough to converse.
that's fascinating. So you're growing up now. So this is happening. What made you? Because I assume y'all were getting pulled in different directions by the culture. Like you said, it was,
Hmm.
the gang violence really expanded and increased after the late 1970s, going into the 80s in the inner city. A lot of it had to do with the ending of the Vietnam War, with the
Hmm.
proliferation of weapons, military style weapons that had come from actually the Vietnam War back
Yeah,
into the inner city.
yeah.
And then, of course, addiction crisis that took place among um, first the veterans of the Vietnam War, and they brought those addictions back, and then of course the proliferation of heroin, crack,
Hmm. Oh,
cocaine
yeah.
in the inner city, and you have that lethal combo of everything,
Hmm.
and violence just gets heightened. And you're growing up at the height of the violence in this environment. That's around the time, late '80s, early '90s, that I come of age as a teenager in Oakland, California. The same story,
Hmm.
just seeing uh, and assuming this is normal to just see dead bodies, shootouts,
Hmm.
all of that.
Yeah.
So you were getting pulled in different directions. What made you stay focused in school?
I felt like my parents always had an emphasis on education. They came here to get educated, to go to college here, and they always had education as their top priority. They would always emphasize it at home and said, no matter what you decide to do in life, you need to focus on being well educated. And that should be your priority. That's why we immigrated here, was to give you guys a better opportunity. And you really you know, shouldn't take that for granted ever. And so I think really just them instilling in me that, I need to constantly push myself, read more, do more, study harder, use the opportunity that was afforded me by being in this country, and not squabble those chances down of being able to do better than what my predecessors or my parents or my grandparents were.
So your parents, even though they were, you know, struggling, they were educated and focused on education, or vice versa. Even though they were, educated, they were still struggling. And within that struggle, you had received the message: you're going to do school, you're going to stay focused, regardless of our environment, and
Yeah,
that's what kept you focused. Was
yeah.
there a defining moment for you, and you remember going back to being younger, like I'm going to be a medical doctor one day?
That moment didn't happen until college, to be honest
Mm.
with you. It wasn't until, unfortunately, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer during my freshman year of college, and unfortunately passed away
Mm.
9 months later. That I decided that I wanted to go into medicine. It was a tough period of time for my family, with my father being the primary breadwinner, and the fact also that his diagnosis was missed for about 6 months to a year. So by the time it got diagnosed, had already metastasized, and it was kind of too late to be able to do anything about it. And I just remember going through that process with my dad, and then I even had heard that the doctor that missed the diagnosis ended up committing suicide because he felt so bad about what was
Whoa.
going on. So there was a lot of emotions tied to that, and just being involved in his daily care and having to be an advocate for him within the healthcare system and having to kind of fight for him getting experimental treatments, covered or paid for because there was no treatments at that time that would help with this type of aggressive cancer. So we had to seek experimental treatments and research trials. And I think being involved in that is really what kind of pushed me towards medicine. Because before that, I was kind of hemming and hawing about what to do. I was in college and I was a bio major, but I wasn't sure that medicine was right for me. And it was that 9-month long experience that I decided, yeah, I think I really want to do this for a living. I want to
Mm.
be there for patients and make their lives better if I can.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, it's never the right time to lose a parent. It's always like a defining
For sure.
moment in our lives. And the
Mhm.
fact that you turned that into sort of a mission, like, okay, I've had to advocate for my dad. He was misdiagnosed, and now I'm gonna do better and be better in that medicine community to, almost repair something that was broken.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, I don't think I was taking school that seriously before that. My grades were just okay. They weren't stellar. They weren't great. And after that, I just kind of set my mind. I said, I'm going to do this. And I worked harder, studied harder, and my grades actually shot up rather than going down. Which part of that was because when I was going through my father being really sick, I thought about taking a semester off, and just kind of focusing on his health. And he was like, absolutely not. He wouldn't have it. He was like, there's no way you're going to take time off to come take care of me.
Mm.
He was just like, your priority is your education. So even when he was sick, even when he needed help, he still put me first. And he said, nope, you're staying in school. You're not taking any time off. You're pushing forward.
Wow.
So,
I have some college students now that lost. One of my students lost their mom, unfortunately, and was thinking like, oh, I gotta leave school, help take care of my siblings, and
mhm,
then I said, what would your mom want you to do?
that's exactly it.
Oh, she would want me to stay in school. Okay, then listen to your mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what you did. You're like, I gotta take this journey on for my dad. This is
Yep.
what he wants me to do.
Yep. That's
That's
exactly it.
powerful.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that. I mean, that was my motivator, and that's what motivated through undergrad, through my master's, through med school, residency, fellowship. It just pushed me all the way.
I feel like you know, for a lot of families that come from various cultures, we come from familial culture,
Mm-hmm.
and these are cultures that are very much about sticking together as families and sort of being there to support our families and being, people age, we go take care of them, and of course, in our modern society nowadays, it's tough to do that, and so you have the proliferation of sort of, you know, elder care facilities or facilities where you could just, ship people off to. But in some cultures, it's like, no, you don't do that. You
Mm-hmm.
you take care of your own, and so having that, as part of various cultures, right? I think provides a strength, and the strength is that I'm going to move forward and succeed for my family.
Yeah, absolutely. You have your elders in your household giving you advice, trying to push you along the way, especially because, no path is straightforward, right? You're always going to have setbacks, you're always going to fall back. Even my kids these days, they'll reach out to grandma whenever they got, an issue going on at school or something's bothering them. Even though they got parents in the house, they'll still reach out to grandma because they're close to their grandma and be like, "Hey, grandma, I got this going on at school. What do you think I should do?" And they'll pitch in, those words of encouragement that only the grandparents can say. The parents will say the same thing, but when grandma says it, it's different. Holds a little more value, a little more, it's a little more push for that kid. And they'll be like, "Oh, grandma said this, so I'm gonna do it."
That's great. Do you have any phrases you remember from your dad or your mom that's like hit the spot for you?
Yeah, from my dad, it was always education is first.
Mm,
That's what he would always tell me.
education is first.
Yeah, that was always his line. Whenever I wanted to do something, be like, "Oh, Dad, I'm gonna try for the basketball team. Oh, Dad, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends tonight." He would always say, "Education first. Did you finish your homework? Are you caught up? Are you ahead? Then you can do that." Or if I'm gonna play a sport, he'd be like, "As long as it doesn't affect your grades, as long as you don't fall behind, you can do it."
So Pops was a social worker. So who was he helping?
So he was. So he worked for the state of California. So he was an investigator of retirement homes, and so he investigated elder abuse. So
Wow.
he would go into retirement homes and make sure that that the population there was not being abused, and that they were being treated appropriately. So he would do. I remember him leaving the house in the middle of the night to kind of do raids to try to catch these facilities that have been reported to be abusing their elders. Leaving them in dirty diapers and stuff like that, and not tending to them, not giving them their medications. So he would go and raid these sites in the middle of the night with his team, trying to make sure that these facilities are treating patients right.
Mm. What a powerful job to have. It's like you're
Yeah.
there looking out for the most vulnerable people.
Population, absolutely.
Because not only are they probably the facilities that tend to, have high tolerance for that kind of abuse is probably the ones with more low income
Hmm.
elders,
Yep.
right? So the most vulnerable.
Yep. That's why we lived where we lived.
Wow. Did you feel like your high school prepared you for college?
So my first high school, no. My second high school, when my parents pulled me out of my first high school because there's a lot of gang-related activity going on there, and they saw that it wasn't conducive to me getting ready for college. So they pulled me out and put me into a different high school that they thought was more of a college prep high school, and that definitely better prepared me.
And then from there, where'd you go to college?
So from there, I went to undergrad at UC Irvine. So I did my undergraduate degree there, and then I did an additional year of research. It was actually at that time it was in oncology research because my dad had died of cancer, and I thought I wanted to be a cancer doctor. So I did a year of oncology research, applied to med school, didn't get in my first time, and so after that I went out to a school in the East Coast, did a post-bac program. Um, didn't get into that med school for other reasons. And then I went to Florida, did a 1-year master's program. And after that, got accepted into med school my second time. And then went to Michigan State for medical school.
Wow. So this is a story, see, of rejection.
Absolutely.
And, a lot of times, people out there think that and they follow people that are successful and they see the outcome, a medical degree, money, whatever we value as successful. But one of the things that people don't see in those stories of success is all the rejections.
Oh, yeah. No.
And so I always say, a lot of the story of success is about rejection and what you do with it.
Resilience,
There you go.
right? A lot of these stories is resilience because, yeah, you feel horrible when you get rejected, but you got to use it as fuel to keep going, right? To try harder, to push harder. Um, Allow some introspection. Say, okay, why didn't I get accepted? What am I lacking? What do I need to improve upon? How can I make my application look better to these colleges? Or how can I improve how I come across during the interview process? So it's a lot of introspection to figure out what can you do to make yourself better so you can be a better applicant so the next time around you have a higher chance of getting in.
Let's count the years because I know I got like some high schoolers out there listening. And so let's
Yeah.
count the years because I always like to put this in perspective. So 4 years of college.
4 years of college. So if you do straight, so it's 4 years of undergraduate, another 4 years of medical school, and then after that, you do residency, and that can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on what type of residency you want to do. I did internal medicine, so that was 3 years. And then if you want to start specializing, then you do what's called a fellowship. And so I did another 3 years, which was for me to be a cardiologist, and that was a general cardiologist. And then I did another specialty where I'm an interventional cardiologist now, where I do minimally invasive heart procedures. That's where I replace heart valves without open heart surgery, fix blocked arteries, things of that nature. And that, for me, at the time that I did it, was a 1-year program. Now, most sites are actually a 2-year program.
So this is 15 years you just gave me.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
When I got my first official job as a physician, I was 34 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, see, for some young people, they're going to think like, man, I don't want to do this. It's going to take too long. I'm going to become old. But one of the things I like to always share is that, like, if you take like a cup and you fill it up with a little bit of water, right? I mean, a quarter of it, and that represents your life. You know, you just go a little bit higher than that. That's a little above a quarter of the water in the cup. And that's how much life you've lived along with doing medical school. You still have most of that cup to fill with your medical degree or doctorate degree or whatever higher degree you want to get. But a lot of times we get caught up in, I don't want to spend 15 years in school or 10 years or 5 years. And the reality is that if you have a passion for it, you got to go for it.
Absolutely. I think, honestly, the other way of looking at it is don't look at it as 15 years. Just say, okay, I want to go to medical school. That's 4 years. Then once you're done with that 4 years, then you decide, well, what do I want to do next? Okay, I want to do a residency. That's another 3 years. So I'm a runner. And so when I set out to go for a run, I don't tell myself, oh, man, I got to do 10 miles today. No, I set something realistic. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna run 3 miles, and then once I hit 3 miles, I'm like, I'm good. I'm gonna go another 3, and then once I hit 6, I'm like, well, actually, I still feel good. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna do another 4, and so all of a sudden, I've ran 10 miles. But I didn't set out that morning and say, I'm gonna run 10 miles today. I just take it as it comes. Take it in small little bits. Give yourself reasonable goals that you can achieve. Because if you give yourself a lofty goal, you're going to get discouraged along the way. But if you give yourself one small, reasonable goal at a time, all of a sudden you'll look back like, oh, wow, I actually did do 10 miles today. I thought I was going to do 3. That's the same thing with education.
That's a great approach. So if you see something daunting, you're saying 10 miles or climbing a mountain or going to med school, rather than think of it, hey, 15 years or 10 miles or 3,000 feet, you think of it like, I'm going to get through a few hundred feet and a few hundred more, take a little break in between, reassess. Am I still committed? Yes, I am. And keep moving forward.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it. You kind of psych your brain out a little bit, because when your brain thinks about all the things that you have to do over a 15-year period of time, you get discouraged, right? There's just too much going on in such a wide gap. But if you just put yourself at, I'm just going to get through this and then see how it goes, you kind of trick your mind into just focusing on the moment and not focusing on that daunting future.
Yeah, I mean, places we grew up in, a lot of times we see people, friends, for me, family too, that end up in prison. They're doing hard time, 10 years, 15, 20 years. So I always tell people, like, I'd rather do school time. For me, it was 9 years for my PhD. I'd rather do, 9 years of school than however many years some of my, buddies ended up having to do in prison. And that's my perspective on it. It's like, what kind of time would I rather be doing?
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thinking of adversity and struggle, a lot of times people don't see a path forward when they encounter adversity and struggle. What kept you going when you did encounter obstacles? And importantly, were there people in your life who encouraged you? Were there mentors that came along in that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up the way I did and, losing life early on, I think that taught me that, you never take things for granted. Live each day to your fullest and push forward, right? Because you never know when that advantage is going to be gone or when that opportunity will be gone. I think for me in my younger days, I didn't have any mentors because there was no one that looked like me. There was no one that was doing what I was doing. I don't think if you interviewed any of my classmates or my neighborhood friends, I don't think anyone would have thought that I would be making any major contributions to this society. I
Whoa,
don't
why
think
not?
I, it just that's not what you do when you grow up from my neighborhood.
So what were you like? What would they what do you think those kids would describe you like? Were you the quiet one? Were you the like clown? Or what were you
Uh,
doing that made them that you think made them think like, nah, not Mike?
yeah, I was definitely a quiet person for the most part, but I just think it was more the environment. I don't know of any other, you know, people that graduated college and did any sort of graduate education in my neighborhood. I would say
Wow.
a lot of the people from my neighborhood were um, in jail or just worked a blue collar job. You know,
Mm.
so I think it was just the environment I grew up in. I think just didn't foster that type of advanced education and pushing along in an advanced degree.
Mm.
So, like I said, there was no one around me doing what I was doing, so I didn't really have much mentorship. The mentorship really, I think, played a larger role as I was in medical school and residency and fellowship, and then obviously when you get to that level of education and of your career, you start looking around and you start wanting to emulate other people that are doing what you aspire to do, and that's I think where the mentorship role played a big factor into what I was doing, especially when I was looking to become a cardiologist and an interventional cardiologist. The people that were training me were obviously my mentors. But as a kid and a college student, I was just kind of on my own.
Whoa. So when there was that moment to jump to med school, it was like you had to figure everything out on your own.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
didn't have anyone in the family that had been
We
a
have no
medical doctor.
doctors in our family. My brother's a lawyer. We don't have anyone past a college education in our family. So we don't have any professionals. We were the first in our
So
family.
both of you went off to post baccalaureate degrees on your
Hmm.
own.
Yeah, just
First gen to the post bac.
exactly.
Post, wow,
Hmm.
that's powerful. Well, mentorship is so important, and I know that now you've served as a mentor to many um, folks that are in med school and that are medical practitioners. A study in the Journal of Medical Education found that students from disadvantaged backgrounds who received strong mentorship were 40% more likely to complete medical school. Another study found that doctors who had early exposure to supportive medical professionals were 30% more likely to practice in underserved communities, which is another important factor. A lot of my listeners are young people that have big dreams to finish high school, go to college, and be a doctor for the hood,
Hmm.
as they might say. Can you walk us through, like, what would it take, like, for that? You talked about the degrees you got, but like, how do you start? Like, let's say you're in high school, or let's say you're just starting college, and you're like, you don't really like chemistry that much, but
Hmm.
you got to pass it to get to medical school. Like, what's your advice? How do you
Yeah.
get through those early moments where you kind of get discouraged because you're having to learn heavy stuff early on?
Yeah. That's a great question. I definitely wouldn't recommend doing it the way I did it. I would recommend finding a group of similarly like people that have similar goals to you. Maybe not the exact same goals, but similar goals, and surrounding yourself with those people. And that group of people tends to kind of push you along. You you end up pushing each other along, really, more than anything else. So finding a like-minded group of people who have similar goals to you that will help you push you along, better yourself, and work harder. Be there for you when you're having that moment where you're like, oh, I can't do this, And you know, your friend would be like, yes, you can, you could do it, we could do it, we're going to do this together. So I think having that peer support is really important. And I think when even when you're younger, I think opportunities and exposure are huge. And so I think volunteering at your local hospital, you know, asking questions of your doctor when you go to see your doctor visit, saying, hey, you know, what's a day like for you? Or can I come hang out with you for a day, you know, and see what you do, just to make sure that, A, this is something you're interested in, this is something you want to do. Because if that motivation isn't there in those moments of weakness in which you're struggling with chemistry, you know, um, you're gonna look back on that experience. And you're gonna say, okay, well, I'm not too into chemistry right now, but I do really want to be a doctor, so I'm gonna push through this. I'm gonna try really hard to do well, and because I'm looking at my goal above this. You know, there are definitely subjects that I hated when I was in college, and I just said, oh, I don't want to do this. You know, I don't want to do physics and calculus, but you kind of push through it because you're seeing that goal at the end, that you do want to become a physician in the future, or whatever. You want to become a lawyer, or you're an astronaut, or whatever your goal in life is. You just see these obstacles as stepping stones. You know, you just got to clear this hurdle so you can move on to the next.
Did you have those peer groups in college,
I had the
medical
peer
school?
groups in college.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
After once again, I think after my dad died, and I went back, and I was totally motivated that I was going to do this, and I was, you know, going to excel. I did get involved in some peer groups, some tutoring groups, you know, and you know, I would go to these tutoring sessions for the classes that I was struggling in, knowing that everyone else is kind of in the same boat as me, and you know, I'd find friends to study with that can help me out. And, you know, through that peer support system, I was able to kind of push through the classes that I didn't like. And then the classes that I did like and I enjoyed, I would offer my help to those people that were struggling in those classes.
Mm. Okay, we're gonna go on a little short break here. Let the audience process a little bit of, this powerful conversation of this journey that you've had. What got you into med school, and then sort of, giving advice on that process. If there's anyone out there that's, thinking about med school, because I'm not gonna lie, when I was a kid, I thought about being a doctor, and I think a lot of kids out there that grow up in struggle, they want to be like I said, a doctor for the hood. They want to come back and heal people. And I guess we have different ways of helping people heal, but the fact that you're doing it by saving lives at a time is powerful. So we'll be back. I'd like to take this time to introduce you to my book, Street Life, Poverty, Gangs, and a PhD. Check it out. It's on Amazon. It has my own journey and some helpful advice on how to overcome adversity. Welcome back to Sueños to Success. Today, my guest here is Dr. Mike Shenoda, an incredible cardiologist out in the community. And he's been sharing with us a little bit of his journey, right? What got him into medicine, that grueling journey of being in medical school. I want to ask him a little bit about, sort of, is it worth it? Like, and why he thinks it's worth it. So, but before we do that, I do want to talk a little bit about resilience and growth mindset, because that's the number one indicator of success for any profession. So a study in academic medicine found that resilience training programs reduce burnout in medical students by 25% and increase their sense of purpose. So that resilience training is how do you get through a situation where you feel that you're not going to make it through? What strategies do you use? And you heard Dr. Shenoda talk a little bit about his strategy for going on that 10-mile run, or putting in those 15 years in medical school, right? He doesn't think of it in that long-term 10 years, 10 miles or 15 years. He thinks of it in steps and gradual steps. And that's a resilience strategy that he shared. So one example is also facing rejection in a positive way. Whether you apply to medical school or other programs, for those of you applying to college, you might get lots of rejections. even today, I myself have authored lots of academic articles and 9 books, and there's many times where I get rejected as an author, whether it's for a book project or for a journal article that I write. They still tell me, nope, we don't want this. It's junk. It's garbage. Go fix it. So rejection is just built into my career and what I do as a professor and researcher. So let's just face it, folks. Life is going to reject us, and it's about what we do with that rejection. We got to reapply. We got to seek feedback. We got to improve our application, improve our project. There was another study in medical education that found that students who develop a growth mindset, and this is important, I'll define it. Essentially, it's believing that our abilities can be improved. So we could live in a box, and that fixed mindset is essentially I'm not good at chemistry, so I'm not going to go pursue medical school. Or it could be, you know what? I'm learning how to be good in chemistry. I'm going to form my peer groups that are going to support me get through this chemistry class. That way I could have a shot at applying to medical school if that's something that I'm still interested in. So growth mindset is very important, and this study found that 30 that medical school students are 35% more likely to persist in medical training even if they face adversity when they have that growth mindset. So many students, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, question if they belong in medical school, and resilience helps them recognize their worth and push forward. Dr. Shenoda, I wanted to ask you during your journey, did you ever feel what we consider imposter syndrome? And essentially, imposter syndrome is when you feel like you don't belong in that space, or others in that space make you feel like, hey, you don't belong here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can definitely feel that when you're in medicine at times. I felt it when I was on the East Coast doing a post-bac program, in which the program was something that I did after my first rejection to medical school. And the way the program works is you do the academic work that you would get your first semester of medical school. And it was a 3-month program. And if you did well, if you were like top 5 in the class, they would accept you into the medical school. And I did remarkably well. And I was top 5 of the class. But I was told that unfortunately they could not offer me a position because I didn't really fit the racial quota that they were kind of looking for, because this was kind of back in the day of affirmative action, and they said that I didn't really fit that quota. So even though I was top 5 of the class, they were going to have to pass on me and let another applicant in that maybe had not done as well, but fit their profile as to what they were looking for a little bit better. So I definitely felt that imposter syndrome. So I was like, well, I'm here and I did the coursework and I showed you I could do the coursework, but because I'm not what you're looking for, I'm being rejected again for, getting into a program.
Well, so let me unpack this. So you're in a program that's like, hey, the top 5 are going forward,
Hmm.
and they're like, hold on, we're switching that because you're not the right kind of minority.
Right, exactly.
That's powerful. So you must have had a lot of, what was the emotion?
Initially, it was anger,
Yeah.
right? Because I had really worked hard. It wasn't easy, and I'd moved out to the East Coast, to do this program. I've kind of upended my life, with the obvious goal of getting into medical school. So at first it was anger, and then after that, I felt cheated. And then after that, I just decided, well, it's their loss because I'm going to show them that I'm still going to get into medical school and I'm going to do well. So I took that anger, took that loss, and turned it into a motivating factor. And so that's when I applied for a master's program and finished a master's program in a year. Took a 2-year program and finished it in a year. And then during that year, reapplied to medical school with my master's GPA, and I did well there and got in.
Wow. So you had that growth mindset. You were like, well, you know what? Regardless of the politics of this or I got done wrong, I'm going to prove them wrong,
Yeah.
and I'm going to go figure out my own route.
Hmm.
And you did.
Yeah. Because I knew I couldn't change the outcome of this decision. This was something that really wasn't in my hands, right? I mean, this was, the major university. They had made their decision. I wasn't going to change it. And so after I got around the idea that, this is not something that I'm going to change, so I need to change the way that I'm thinking about this.
Mm. Now, the days of affirmative action in California, just long gone in the 1990s, but in the, rest of the country, Supreme Court decision was recent.
Mm-hmm.
Those days are gone now in terms of quotas and sort of trying to diversify certain specific groups.
Yeah.
Now, there are some stats out there in terms of who becomes a medical doctor. And for instance, for African Americans, we know that they're, I think, less than 5% of the medical practitioners in the country, but their population's like in the 12, 14% in the as a country. And then I know for Latinos, also 5% of the medical profession and like something like 20% of the total US population. So you kind of ran into this kind of project of trying to do something about this inequity, but the inequity ended up also exacerbating with you as yet another minority that's coming in trying to enter the system.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think are the right kind of strategies for making sure we have appropriate representation or diversification of the medical profession?
That's a tough question. Yeah, if only I had all the answers for that. I think it's difficult, right? Because it's a long road, and definitely people that come from more privileged backgrounds, it's easier to take that road, right? Because they have opportunities that aren't necessarily readily available to people of lesser socioeconomic status, and I think that's not just medicine. I think that's just across the board. Any, profession that requires a higher education. I think it's very difficult for those of lower socioeconomic classes to be able to get into those type of positions. And while, uh, it's nice to think, well, best person for the job, I think you do always have to take into consideration the experiences of the person that's coming into, the position who's applying and what they've done with their experiences. And I think allowing there to be more opportunities and more exposure to people of a lower socioeconomic class, I think is a start. It's not the answer, but allowing them to have the opportunities that people have of higher socioeconomic classes should help a little bit with evening out the playing field if they have similar opportunities, similar experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like for instance, there's a lot of Latinos out there that are, from privileged backgrounds, maybe whether they're from Latin America, a wealthy family, or whether they're U.S. based that come from, an upper class family, and they might be okay along that journey because there's resources there.
Right.
Pay for tutoring, supplementals, maybe parents are college educated.
Mm-hmm.
All of those factors are going to give you a net benefit and advantage
Definitely.
in that medical school process.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you take a Latino that's from the hood, from Inglewood, and then he's trying to make it, but he's got to compete against this other Latino that comes from a higher class.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
You're going to underprepare. You're going to, and then now let's just think about any minority group in those two same instances.
Yeah.
One coming from sort of a higher class status and another one coming from a lower class status. You're not going to be able to compete.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a big brain, but the fact that someone's got that test prep paid for, someone's got the MCAT paid for, someone's got the post back paid for, and I see that time and time again with my students. And so
Absolutely.
the economic support, right, is so important.
Absolutely.
And then providing opportunities because we do have, let's say in California, a lot of the patient population in these big cities,
Mm-hmm.
immigrant patients, Latino patients, patients that need to see a resemblance of their community
Mm-hmm.
represented among doctors, and yet there's such a low number
Right.
that providing opportunities for those students that come from disadvantage to become medical doctors, that
Mm-hmm.
pipeline is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got to find a way to break that cycle,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a cycle. It's just like kind of the poverty cycle. You know, the more poor you are, you continue down that path, and unless you find somewhere to break that chain, which is a tough thing to do, that cycle continues,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I made it because, a teacher helped me, and then she put me in a program, and then that program put me in another program. And so when I got to undergrad, I was in this program. It was for first generation students,
Mm-hmm.
EOPS they called it, Equal Opportunity Program, and so it was if you're first generation, low income, you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they gave me extra tutoring, and then after that, when I graduated undergrad, I got to Berkeley for my PhD, and there was another program, graduate opportunity program. Same thing for low income. You had to show that you had low income
Mm-hmm.
status. You did, and at the time, actually, my twins were born. The kids were born, and I started my first year. And not only was I low income, but now my wife and I were trying to raise these twins, and
Mm-hmm.
we went to the program. It was like, hey, we're having a hard time financially, and we got support, and so that's what allowed me to finish school.
Right.
Just having a little bit of the financial support,
Mm-hmm.
but also the mentoring that they implemented along the way for first generation of college, first generation of graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of programs I think are important. And even for hospitals, and I know there's hospitals out there that implement these kinds of programs for, say, residents that are coming from the life experience that you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where I grew up or how I grew up, and this is the community I'm trying to serve. Can you help me out? And then having a abundance of resources to support
Yeah.
those kinds
They
of
do have
things.
some of those programs in medical school. I think they got a long way to go to try to improve some of those resources for certain. And also they also have some med school is really expensive. So they have some payback programs that when you get out and if you're serving in an underserved community, your med school loans are forgiven because you're back to serving your community. So that high cost of medical school can be forgiven in those situations. But those are programs that are more geared towards the after product, right? We need to focus in our society about programs that are more geared towards kind of the pre-production, right, of these students. How do we gear them up to get them into colleges, to get them into graduate school, to get them into medical school or law school or whatever their aspiration may be. And so I think those are tougher programs to implement because you need government buy-in, you need state buy-in, and those opportunities have to be felt to be strong enough to push these kids through this long process of educating themselves and not faltering or wavering, but keep going even after you get rejection after rejection. Because as we talked about, rejection is a part of life. So you not only have to support these kids financially, but you got to support them emotionally as well to push them through the process.
That's right. A lot of the work we do is we teach teachers how to support students, provide emotional support.
Right.
Not just like, here's the content you need, but I believe in you. You got this. I know you've seen a lot in life. I know you've lost someone. And I know one day you'll be a great doctor. And that psychological approach is so important in education because when someone believes in you, you feel limitless.
Yeah.
And that's such an important point. Do you ever go back to the hood where you grew up? And
All the time. My mom still lives in Bellflower. So
Wow.
I go back and I visit all the time. Yeah, and it's fun to see people from the neighborhood.
So your
So
mom's in Bellflower,
my
and
mom
then
still lives
what about
there.
your schools you went to? Do you ever show up like the people are like, "Hey, he came here to the school. He's Dr. Shenoda," you know?
I've missed all my high school reunions
Oh
because I
yeah.
was, for some reason, always on call. But ironically, I've ran into some of my old high school friends at like friends' weddings and stuff like that, and they all tell me the same. They're like, "Well, we can't believe you're a cardiologist."
Wow.
I always get that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, but it's
Again, it's just because they didn't see that in themselves and they didn't see that in you
hmm
because in that collective, in that environment, it's like none of us are gonna make it.
yeah,
Is that what it is?
that's exactly what it
Wow.
is. No,
Well, let's talk a little bit about the emotional side of medicine. I know you brought this up a little bit about it's like sometimes you're able to help people, sometimes you're not able to help people,
hmm
both on the table in terms of supporting people with heart conditions, but also I just mean it like you know people in our society that are struggling, or as you mentioned, even students that don't get opportunities to end up finishing medical school. What are some of the ways in which you kind of participate in supporting uh, change in the way that healthcare is done, and in the way that medical school trajectories are
yeah.
followed?
I mean, luckily I'm in in our hospital is a teaching hospital, so we have both interns and residents that we can mentor and give lectures to, and they shadow us, in our kind of daily interaction with patients. They scrub it on procedures with us. They see patients in the clinic with us. But also we have opportunities because we're here next to UCSB, and we have pre-med students that also do the same thing and will come shadow us or spend a week seeing patients with us and see what our interactions are and what the kind of life of a physician is as well. Now that I have two high schoolers, I've had some requests from some high school students to also come and shadow me
Oh,
as
that's
well
cool. Wait,
in the hospital.
let me pause there real quick. I'm sorry, but I just have to ask you, Mike, fifth grade Mike, right? Let's take you back
Mm.
right to fifth grade Mike. Do you ever picture yourself, your father of two wonderful children, three,
Three. I have
three
three.
wonderful children, my bad, two wonderful high schoolers, and then a
Uh-huh.
middle schooler, right?
Elementary.
Elementary, that's right,
Yeah.
elementary. Three wonderful children. I've gotten to meet two of them.
Right. Yes.
And then three wonderful children. You have amazing wife. Fifth grade Mike, would he have ever imagined that he would be like this dad that was
hmm
like cardiologist,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
with all the
Fifth
abundance of
grade
the
Mike
family?
wanted to be a CIA agent and be single. That's what I wanted to do when I was in fifth grade. I was like, I'm going to be a CIA agent.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I never imagined I'd have the life that I have now.
Wow, that's incredible, incredible.
Yeah.
So now that you're an esteemed doctor that's doing all these great things you were mentioning, what advice would you give to young people who come from similar backgrounds and dream of entering the medical field?
I would say the first and probably most important thing when you're coming from this type of background is rise above the expectation.
Mm,
Everyone kind of expects people to act a certain way and be a certain way based on the environment that they're coming from. And, you should never follow those expectations. You should always strive to go way above those expectations because
mm,
those expectations is like, that's the bottom, right? That's the least you can do in your life is continue what you were kind of born into. But you should always try to strive to be better than what you were born into. I'll give you an example. What's the sign of a great teacher, right? The sign of a great teacher is when their student can outdo them, right?
mm,
So when their students can do better than they do, you've excelled as a teacher.
mm.
And I think it's the same thing for our environment. You should always try to rise above the expectation of your environment. Do better than what your environment or what society or what everyone else thinks you're capable of doing.
Mm.
take that environmental negativism and turn it into fuel to support you and push you forward past what anyone would expect you to do.
That's powerful. You heard it from Dr. Shenoda. Everyone, that sometimes some people set the bar here for you very low, and you just got to go above that, whatever bar people set for you. Now, sometimes in life, we want to make sure that we could raise the floor as well as when we raise the bar for people. But if no one's raising the floor for you, and you just got to surpass that bar, you just get past those expectations that, someone might have. Maybe someone told you you're never going to amount to anything. Maybe someone told you, you, medical school? Nah, never. Or maybe someone said to you, hey, listen, I know you have a dream, but once you focus on reality, you keep that dream going, you go above and beyond what anyone expects from you. This is what Dr. Shenoda did. This is what he's doing now with having surpassed those expectations. I just want to thank you for sharing your powerful story with us. Your journey
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, your journey is incredible. It's proof that adversity does not define a person. It's how we respond to it that matters. And to our listeners, I hope this episode inspired you to reflect on your own path and the impact you can have in your community. Remember, each of us has the power to overcome obstacles and turn our struggles into purpose. Thank you for listening to Sueños to Success. See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
The pleasure's all mine.